Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Photography Live podcast, Photos and Stories. My name is Andrew Biraj. I'm a professional photographer based in Washington, D.C. Photos and Stories is a social media live podcast on photography. In this fortnightly broadcasted live show, I have the privilege to invite legendary and successful professionals in the photography industry from all around the world. My purpose is to present behind the picture stories of the life and the journey of these legends. Today, it's a great honor to present legendary Australian photographer, author of 11 books, and FujiFilm ambassador, Michael Coyne. So please welcome Michael Coyne.
Hi, Andrew. How are you? Thank you very much. I appreciate you calling me here.
It's a great honor, sir. Thank you we really appreciate you for having you with us in this Photos and Story third live show.
Well, it's great to be able to follow people like Eli Reed and David Burnett, and I hope you can keep getting people of their quality who will give us great ideas and great inspiration to take better photographs.
Awesome, great. Thank you. Thanks for the best wishes, and I'm really excited today to see all of your legendary works and to learn all the behind the picture stories of your life. So, how have you been? I know this has been a very difficult situation for all of us all over the world. And what have you been doing? How have you been? How have you been coping with the situation?
Well, we were very lucky. I'd been on assignment working on projects traveling across the world, and as earlier this year, and as we left each country like South Korea or Israel or Uzbekistan, they were closing the borders after us. So we got back to Australia just in time. They let us in, thank goodness. But I've been locked up all of that time at home, and it's a strange situation. Though I have to say that I have had occasions on assignment where I've been locked up and haven't been allowed out, stuck in hotels in various countries, waiting for people to come and collect me or not allowing me out on the streets. I remember working in Iran. I worked there for decades, and I was there at one stage, and I was taken from the airport to my hotel, stayed in the hotel. I wasn't allowed out without my minder. And I was there for days. It was just going crazy, hanging around in this hotel. But luckily I had 2 rooms. Nobody was coming into the country. So at this particular time, so it was easy to get a hotel, and the hotel rooms were cheap. So I had a double room. And what I used to do is after I'd read some books, and then I would get a Walkman, which is something quite a while ago, yes, with my little tapes. And I would put on Bob Dylan, and I'd run half a dozen times around the 2 rooms. I'd take out the tape, and I'd put on Paul Simon, run half a dozen times the other way. Then I'd put on Mozart, and I'd just run back and forward, back and forward. And after about a week of that, I was just so frustrated that I sneaked out of the hotel, right? So I'm walking along the street, and suddenly a car pulled up in front of me and cut me off. And the people said, "Where's your passport? Who are you? Give me your passport." And I said, "No, I'm not going to give you my passport. Get lost." And they said, "No, give us your passport." And I said, "Get lost." And I just ran. I ran back to the hotel. Anyway, they were trying to rob me, and there'd been a lot of robberies in that area near the hotel. So when I got back into the hotel, I went and spoke to the manager and said, "Look, these people tried to rob me, trying to take my passport." He said, "Okay, I'll call the police." So he called the police, and the police then took me to the local police station. So I go into the police station, and I'm walking along the passageway, and they had glass walls. And I looked into one of the rooms, and there were the 2 men that had tried to rob me. And so I said to this policeman, "That is the 2 men that tried to rob me." He said, "No, no, no, no. They are 2 secret security police. They wouldn't be robbing you. They'd be helping you." So I think the police were running a little racket around the hotel.
Yeah, seems like this kind of situation is not new for you, and you have been through a lot of difficult situation, difficult time, and in different places all over the world. And means I know that remember that you have been talking about your some exciting adventurous assignments with me. You have been sharing with me, so we are very excited to know all these things, and and we will be seeing a lot of photos from you. So Michael, you have been pursuing documentary photography, telling the stories of people's life for over 30 years now. So you have traveled all over the world and covered numerous assignments for the international media, as well as pursuing your own photography project. But let's start from the very beginning. How did you start photography in your life?
Okay, well, it was a strange experience. I'm born in England, and we went to New Zealand. And on the way back from New Zealand, we went through the Panama Canal. And there was a man standing on the deck looking over the rails and taking pictures with a box brownie camera. And I was watching him for a little while. And then he turned to me and he said, "Hey, Sonny, do you want to have a go at this?" So he gave me the box brownie camera. And I looked into this little box and I thought, wow, this is magical. This is amazing. And so from that time, I always wanted to be a photographer. I was just so intrigued by this kind of magical thing that you could capture. Now, I gather some of your viewers are a little bit young and they might not know what a box brownie camera is. So there's one behind me. Just give me a moment and I'll just grab it so I can show them what it looks like.
Sure, of course.
So there it is. This is a box. Let me get this in here. Let me take it. This little strange little thing, it almost looks like something out of a spaceship, doesn't it? We've lost it again. Where is it? Can you see it? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yeah. Okay, there it is. Look at that. Isn't that weird, huh?
Awesome. Great.
And it took roll film, and you could only take a few images on it. So, and you can't look on the back. Nothing to see on the back.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So nowadays it's really rare to get this kind of cameras, and a lot of new photographers, they haven't been experienced with this kind of camera ever, and especially in this digital era. So I've met a lot of photographers who only started by their career only with the digital medium, so they don't have the taste of the negative and stuff like this, or the darkroom. So yeah, please proceed, and I want to know. Yeah.
So then we were heading back to England because of my father's work. And then we came out to Australia. So when I came out to Australia, I managed to get a job at a weekly newspaper as a photographer, as a junior, as a cadet. So I made coffee for all the photographers and picked up after them and cleaned up after them. And then I managed to get a cadetship, which takes 4 years working for the media. And the newspaper was taken over by Rupert Murdoch, and it became part of his empire. So I was working for Rupert Murdoch in his daily papers, his magazines, and various other publications that he had. And while I was there, I started doing my own photography, my own ideas. And one of the best tips I could ever give anybody about who wants to get into photography in the area or genre that I work in is go out and do your own ideas. So what I would do was go out and I'd shoot things like this photograph that you're looking at now of the Aboriginal people working as stockmen, and then the Aboriginal people working in rodeos. And then I would work with them hunting, all these different things that they were doing. And I would send them to an agency in London. Now, the agency would sell them all over the world, and maybe they wouldn't sell them. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, and I made money like that. But it gave me an opportunity to photograph things that were my ideas and doing it my way. At the same time, I went and did a book about people who shaped Australia, and they could be famous or not so famous. Like this man was a miner in Cooper Pedy, and these miners had to be really tough to survive up there. They would throw sticks of dynamite in each other's caves. They would shoot each other. They were really very, very tough people in those days. So I photographed this man who was working out there, and I also photographed an artist who's extremely well known in Australia. His name's Brett Whiteley. He's a great painter, mainly a painter, but he did a lot of sculpture as well. And photographing him, he'd been photographed many, many times, so I wasn't sure what to do. So we spent the day in his studio with him. And while we're walking around his studio, he had paintings all over the floor that he'd been working on. And he started working on a painting that was on the wall. And then I stepped back to get a better picture of him, and I stepped into some paint, and I immediately put a footprint in the middle of one of his paintings. Now, his paintings sell for astronomical sums of money. So somewhere there's a painting with my footprint in the middle of it. But then he was sitting down talking to us. And while Brett Whiteley was talking to us, I shot this picture of him, as you can see, reflected in this perspex box, plastic box. But he's got this skull with a bird ripping the skull. Now, Brett, as it's well known, liked to have the odd substance. He enjoyed having various substances that kept him going. So I guess he had a lot of issues in his brain going on while he's taking these drugs or what, booze. I mean, we were there at breakfast time. He had a bottle of champagne that he'd already started on. So what it was showing the kind of complexity of this man with this skull in the foreground that he created with this bird ripping the brains out of somebody, and then him reflected back and forward in it. So always, right from the beginning, I've tried to make my pictures tell a story and be interesting to look at, not just as a record of what's happening, but actually having more inside the picture that takes you into the photograph and tells more about the person I'm photographing. Now,
yes, amazing. So you have been talking about the Aboriginal people in Australia. So you have been photographing them and this amazing artist and your footprints on the painting he has done. So so have you been photographing the Aboriginal? Like, have you done any stories on the Aboriginal people in Australia? Have you, like, what kind of stories did you bring out from that community?
Oh, well, mainly I was working on them in those early days and doing stories about, positive stories about how they were running their own farms or ranches, whatever you call them in different countries, big cattle places. So it was looking for the positive stories that I could show of these people working in different parts. And they were cowboys, so working as rodeos and various things like that. Because I've spent most of my career out of the country. So this was just my beginning in that area. So I was doing something that I thought was interesting to send to this agency in London. Now, the next thing I did for this agency in London, we had a major drought, and it was just huge in the 80s. And I went out and I photographed the people working in the outback. I mean, the ground was just burnt dry. There was very little water. People were working there. And I sent all my pictures to this agency in London, and the pictures ended up in National Geographic, Life magazine. They got printed everywhere in the world. It just became a huge story. So it was my break into the international scene, and it was the beginning of me starting to work overseas. I then left Murdoch's empire, and I started working freelance, shooting for stories all over the world. And this particular picture here, what was happening was that the farmers couldn't feed their sheep. So what they were doing is taking them to a dump, and all of these people that you see on the horizon were executing them, shooting them in the head. And then, as you can see, they were kicking them down into the pit. And in the pit, most of them were dead. If they weren't, the man on the bottom right corner was shooting them again to make sure that they were dead. And it was a terrible, terrible scene to see all of these dead sheep because the farmers couldn't afford to feed them. So it was it said a lot about how bad that the drought was. Now, that picture got used many, many times around the world, and it got me started in working on the international scene. So it was quite an important picture for me. Yeah. And then after that, it got me my first assignment with Time magazine. So I went up to Papua New Guinea to photograph the Pope with the people in Papua New Guinea, and I managed to get this picture there. But what I was doing was standing on a platform photographing the Pope at the particular time that I took this picture. And while I'm shooting the pictures of the Pope, I turned around and I saw this man standing there. And I had a long lens on a tripod, so I took 2 quick frames of this man as I turned around, and then it was gone. And I managed to capture this picture right at that moment, and then continued doing the series of images we were doing for Time magazine of the Pope up there. Yep. And then I got another break. I went to the Philippines, and I'd been invited up there to do some work. And while I was up there, I got involved with some people who are working in the sex industry. And some of these people's job was to try and rescue the children that that were in the sex industry. So I photographed this young couple, young sex workers, and I photographed some younger kids that had been caught up in the sex trade. And what happened was that we managed to get one of the kids out of the sex industry. I was with these people that managed to take this kid right away from it all. But unfortunately, one of the people with us raped the kid afterwards. So it was a terrible story that happened after this kid had been rescued.
That's great. That's really amazing. Yeah, I would personally be very interested to know about that story. Would you mind to share a little bit from that stories?
Yeah, sure. Because of look, it's really important about who you know and the contacts you have and the networks you have. So when I went up to Philippines to work the very first time, I met some people that were heavily involved in trying to help people in the sex industry. So they took me to the areas that a lot of these things were happening, and we spent days there because it's very dangerous. It's dangerous for the people involved. It's dangerous for the children. But after the amount of time, they managed to pull one of the children away from this whole thing, get them away to a home, and that's where, unfortunately, the kid get attacked. This particular picture you do see was of 2 people working as sex workers, and they were just in their teens, mid-teens, young kids. And they would bring either of them. The young man was working with men, and the young girl was working with men as well. And sometimes they'd bring their customers back to this little hut that they were living in. And it's quite tragic and sad, but they allowed me to take some pictures of them, very, very few. But I feel this one is just kind of such a sad picture of the just 2 young kids trying to live their lives the only way they could survive, but being in the sex industry. But it wasn't only the sex industry that I photographed when I was there. What happened was, while I was at a conference there, I became good friends with this young man who said, look, I know that you're a photographer and you like doing stories. Would you like to come and meet my people? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, look, we're Islamic and we live down in the south of the Philippines. You are welcome to come down and share your time and take pictures of us. So I then made arrangements to go down. He called himself Muhammad. Okay. So I was welcomed down to Muhammad's area. Now, what happened was Muhammad contacted me. I went down to Mindanao in the southern Philippines, and I went to Davao City. Now, I'd been given instructions to stay at a particular hotel. Now, that's a lovely word for this run-down, rotting place that I stayed in. It had, blood on the walls. It just had this tiny iron bed. It had a ceiling fan that just went round and around, clicking, 90 times a minute, because there was no air conditioner. And I know it's 90 times because I spent a week in that room counting the tiles on the wall and counting the times the fan went around and around. Now, one night there was a knock on the door and 3 men pushed into my room, and they were dressed in medical clothes. They grabbed me and my camera gear, rushed me down the back stairs of the hotel, out through the back door, through the kitchen into a waiting ambulance. They pushed me on the floor, threw a blanket over the top of me, and we drove up into the hills and the jungle and were met by other people who were, I discovered, members of the Moro National Liberation Front, the Moros who were fighting for freedom in the Philippines. Now, they took off all their gear and became part of the tribe that were working there. These are the people that looked after me the whole time I was there. They were my personal guards. And for days I spent wandering through the jungle with these people, photographing what was going on with them. They were very careful. They wouldn't let me go near anything, any ambushes or anything at that stage. They were very careful how they looked after me. In fact, it was very difficult to get pictures of them. But, these were the sort of things I was getting because they'd be sitting in the sun, or they'd be just relaxing, doing stuff. So it's more pictures behind the scenes than it's actually what's going on, because you always think of rebels or these type of people that are all out shooting most of the time. They're not. It's not like that. So it's always very difficult to get pictures of them. So there I was doing pictures really of them sleeping. But I also photographed the 2 most wanted men in the Philippines. And incidentally, my friend Muhammad was the 3rd most wanted man in the Philippines. And that's why he was very careful about where he sent me and what I did. But the man on the right there is the military commander, and the guy on the left is one of the leaders of the revolution, of the Moro National Liberation Front. And that's Lake Malawi, where we were working. Now, the leader, the head of the revolution there, said to me one day, I went to military school in the Middle East. He said, now, if you ever want to go to a revolution that's being run by Islamic people, let me know, because most of them were in my class. They were my classmates. So anytime you need to know someone, give me a call. He was very helpful for me. Yes. And, they trusted me so much that one day they said, look, here's what we're going to do for you. We want to really help you. So what they got me to do was go and wait on a hilltop. Standing on this hilltop, and they said, look, while you're on this hilltop, what we're going to do is we're going to attack a village down the road where all of these soldiers are. So I'm going to send half my men there, attack the village, and I want to drive them down the road so that they're in front of you, and we'll ambush them in front of you, and then we'll kill them all in front of you so you can get some great photographs. Wow, I thought, this is extraordinary. Here I am, I'm just starting in this career, and people are killing people for me. And I thought about this, and I said, look, I'm awfully sorry. I can't stay. I've got enough pictures now. Maybe another time. I have to get back to my office. They're waiting for the pictures I've already got. I have to leave. I couldn't stay there and do those type of pictures. I had to leave. So I couldn't go back and work with the Moros again, because I would never know if they were setting up a real ambush or just setting up an ambush so I could get great photographs. So it gives you an insight into the moral dilemmas and the ethical dilemmas that you're faced when doing this job on many, many occasions. I mean, that is a bit extreme, I must admit, but it is the sort of thing that you have to deal with many times. In fact, you think, well, I wouldn't do that, but I do know of a photographer that did it. They set up an ambush and he photographed it. And I've never heard of that photographer again. He never worked again, because you can never do something like that and not get found out. But my thing was more than that. I'm not having people killed just so I can get great photographs. Yeah. Okay. Please.
Michael, in this point, I wanted to ask you, like, I also know that you did your research on when you gained your PhD, and your expertise was the ethical side of the documentary photography, and now we are learning these amazing stories. So I wanted to ask you, like, you say that they sort of trusted you, and they took you in their private spaces, and a lot of your pictures shows that you are in a very private space of people. So do you think that that being a foreign photographer, it kind of gave you extra advantage to gain access?
Look, everybody has their own advantage from what they have. And because I happened to be a photographer at the time that could give them access to various magazines that they wanted to get into, they wanted to say, look at us, Marcos is treating us badly, he's killing us, he's torturing us, he's putting us in jail, please get the story out. And there's a lot of very good photographers doing story about these people, like Robin Moyer from Time magazine, who were doing these type of stories, but they wanted the publicity. I had a friend at 60 Minutes who I helped get 60 Minutes team up to film these people later on. So they got more publicity about the things that were going on. When you talk about rebels or bandits or breakaway groups, there are many aspects and facets to it. So you can't make instant judgments. Again, this is about ethical dilemmas. What do you know about it? What do you know the truth of it? Do you know both sides of the story? Are you aware of why they're doing this? And are there good or bad things? I mean, you look at many of these situations. You look at the Israeli-Palestinian situation. There are two sides to every story, and you have to be aware of it before you make judgments. The thing about being a documentary photographer, you can spend the time there to be able to make those judgments about what you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's
Move on.
yeah, let's move on. And so then you came back. You didn't accept the offer of those people, as you found out that they're gonna set up the whole thing for you. So did you like? Was there any other experience you have encountered? Because how did you feel at this moment? Because you said that during the assignments of the sex trafficking, you tried to rescue a sex worker, and then somehow it didn't work out. And then, means the militias, the people, they wanted to set up the whole thing for you. So how do you feel when, because you are also maintaining your networks as well. So how do you feel as a professional photographer?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the sex worker, you feel absolutely terrible about the fact that there's been so much damage to a young human being. There's nothing I can do, but it's, in fact, the guy got caught and arrested that had done the damage, but the damage is already done for that poor child. There's not much you can do, but just feel terrible about it. There isn't anything I can do. With these people in the Moro National Liberation Front, I have to look at the fact that, why are they doing this? Why are they offering me this? What are they showing me? They're trying to get their message out about what's going on and how Marcos was treating them very badly. So how did I feel? I didn't like the fact that there was all this shooting going on. I didn't want to be part of an ambush. I had to make ethical dilemmas. I was very young, thrown in at this young age, trying to make these ethical dilemmas. So it's quite a shock for somebody who'd had a very sheltered upbringing. But after a while, I've been through many situations like this, as I'll show you as I go through my work in other places. So can I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah. So then, because of my networking there, I managed to get into Iran. And the thing about Iran was, I got in there just after the revolution. All the media had been kicked out. The government kicked all the media out because they felt that they weren't getting a fair trial by world media. And I went there with a film crew. We managed to talk our way in. We went to embassies all over the world, the Iranian embassies everywhere, trying to get a visa. And we just couldn't get a visa to get into Iran. And finally, we went to Dubai. And before we went, we'd been reading about poetry in Iran. And when we got into the embassy, we started talking about the people in the embassy, about Omar Khayyam and various poets there. And they were interested in the fact that we'd taken the trouble to learn about the culture of Iran. So I'm never sure to this day whether the embassy gave us a 24-hour visa either to get rid of us or that they actually allowed us to go into Iran because they wanted us to go there. When we arrived in Iran, we were immediately picked up by the secret police and taken to a hotel and told not to leave the hotel. And then a minder came around the next day and took us to the Ministry of Islamic Guidance. And these are the people that would look after any foreigners, mainly media, that came into the country. And we spent 2 months there. So it was a lot longer than the 24 hours that they'd given us. And we then wandered around Iran with our media advisor or minder, trying to photograph the country. At first, the government wouldn't let us see anything, and then gradually they gave us more and more access to various things. Now, on this particular occasion, I was photographing some soldiers marching at a demonstration, and remembering that I was using film in this day, and it was Kodachrome film, which is 64 ISO, very slow film. And what I did was I was standing on the side of the road and I saw these soldiers marching. And to get the picture, to make some more drama to it, I lay in the middle of the road with a 20mm lens, and the soldiers marched over the top of me. And managed to get this image. At this stage, I was working for a series for National Geographic magazine. And so I knew that everything I did for them had to really be something special, because I had a mentor from National Geographic magazine many years ago when I was 16, and he emphasized about really looking harder, trying more, look for another angle, always looking for something that when you look at that picture, you really want to look at it and it takes you into what's going on. All right. So I managed to get this picture, and then I managed to get into the holy city of Qum and photograph these students that were studying to be Islamic leaders. And when I got to the city of Qum and we got into the area where they're studying, there was nothing to see. They're just sitting around in rooms, just grey carpet, white walls, just sitting around. So there was nothing. So I went outside to the courtyard and I saw the water where people wash before praying. And I stood in front of it for hours on end, waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, these two men walked past in their clerical robes. And because I don't use motor drives, we used to have motor drives on our cameras in those days, I just shoot, click, shoot, click, shoot. And I waited till this moment that they were in the right space. And then I fired the frame once, because it only happened and it only worked once. And that is exactly the full frame, because I believe in when taking pictures, I compose them in the camera. So if you actually look at the shape and form of this picture, you'll see how the shadows on the wall actually work with the shadow of the back of the cape that's flowing at the back there. You see the white turban in the mirror, in the window there. So it's got a frame around it. You see that they're actually right to the edge of the frame there. And in the other side, the picture's not unbalanced, it's balanced. So on the other side, you can see a man that looks like he's bowing to the clergyman, that at that time of the revolution, you bowed to them because they were so powerful. So it's about getting a picture that actually has more to it than what it initially has, but also trying to create something, trying to make it creative, trying to make it get the shape, the form, as well as the content, and capturing that moment. Yeah. So, and then I was doing, the streets, because a lot of the time all I was allowed to do is on the streets, and there are all these murals and things trying to encourage the people to fight the revolution. And at this stage when I was there, the war was going on between Iraq and Iran. So the government was trying to force people to become martyrs or to fight against Saddam Hussein. They also had blood fountains around the streets in various places. So I got it in very close with a 20 mil, so I could actually, you almost feel that blood dripping into the camera. And in the background, you have pictures of martyrs and the leaders of the revolution. So it's all things that encourage people to be part of the revolution. The Iranians were very good at setting up things. So it looks like there were demonstrations and a lot going on that was pro the revolution and anti the Americans. But a lot of these things were set up for the media so that we could photograph them and make them look like the people were really on the side of the government. You know, they had mock battles, they had all sorts. But eventually I did get taken down to the war front. And I remember going down there. I've been down there several times, but on this particular occasion, what happened was that I was working for a magazine, and I went down there with a journalist. We flew down to the war front, and while we were down, to get down there, we had to go on these boats through all the reeds in the marshes, and we just went all day through the reeds. Sometimes the reeds were so high you couldn't see anything. Sometimes, as you see here, they're quite low, but you could hear the war going on all around you. Now, there were a few boats going down, and we eventually got to this island. On the island, before getting onto the island, we had to dodge and duck all the mines that were surrounding the island. And then we got onto the island, and we saw these bodies around the island that had just been killed. And so I stood on this wall to try and get some photographs. And as I'm taking these pictures, I looked down at my feet and I thought someone was throwing stones at me. And then I looked up and I realized someone was firing a machine gun at me. So I hurled myself over the top of the wall and lay amongst the dead bodies with everybody else that was there. And we were just blasted with everything. There were mortars, there were rockets, there were machine gun bullets pouring on top of the island. What had happened was that there were 2 German film crews with us at the time. And one of the German film crews said, "Can you fire a mortar off for us?" Of course, the Iranian soldiers are down there to fight the Iraqis. So they fired a mortar off. And then the other film crew said, "Hey, can you fire a mortar off for us?" You fired a mortar off for them. So they fired a second mortar off. And the Iraqis thought this was a big attack because we'd come down the waterway with all of these boats full of soldiers and security people and marching music. So the Iraqis thought they were under attack. So they were blasting us with everything. And then it stopped. Not a sound. You couldn't hear a bird, nothing. The Iraqis must have realized that nothing was happening. They thought perhaps it was a trap. And then Jack, the journalist that was with me, who's a rather well-built man, ran for the boat and got onto the boat so we could get out of there. And the besieged, these are the holy warriors that go down to the front to die for the revolution. The besiegee boy driving the boat couldn't get the boat started. And the boat started to drift, and it drifted towards the minefield. And as it drifted to the minefield, my colleague was getting more and more upset. And then finally he jumped up and down and said, "Get the fucking boat going, you fucking little idiot." The kid couldn't understand English, but he was aware my colleague was upset and managed to get the boat started. We got away and got back to Tehran. And that night we're sitting there watching the television. And as we're watching the television, the compere comes on, and it's the 5 o'clock news, which was in English at the time. And the compere said, "Glory be to God and to our supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Today we took some foreign correspondents down to the war front to show them how we're winning the war." And then his voice disappears and the video changes, and there's my colleague and I down the war front. And it's my colleague in the boat jumping up and down on the boat saying, "Get this fucking boat going, you fucking little idiot." So he was well and truly seen all over the world. Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing experience. Like
Yeah.
these are some exclusive stories we are learning from you. As I was talking to you before this show, we have been sharing our views. I'm just so amazed and blown away by your philosophy behind your pictures too. So, like we often get to see all of the pictures, legendary photos, but we rarely get the opportunity to know the stories behind it. So this is a remarkable opportunity for all of us um, to learn the stories. If you allow me, may I read some comments? We
Please.
are getting a lot of comments, but I'm really sorry that we won't be able to read all the comments because I think we wanna we wanna learn more about your stories. So very quickly, Ali Moon Garjan, he's a very famous journalist from Bangladesh is saying, Ali Murun Gorjan is saying, "Good morning, Biraj Bhai." He's excited with the
Hello.
show. And Mr. Namul Haq was watching. And Mustafa Habib Chaudhary says, "Good morning from Dhaka, Bangladesh, to Biraj Bhai and Michael. Looking forward to great discussion." Fatia Polly, she says, "Thanks, Michael, for showing us the box camera." Remember, I told you, Michael, that a lot of people are still interested on this kind of um, technologies. I wouldn't say these are old technologies, but a lot of people didn't get the opportunity to learn about this technology because of the digital. Because
Yes.
whenever they have taken up the photography, so they started with digital. So whenever they find something, maybe vintage, but it's still a matter of great interest because I think these are coming back again. So and Anne
I s-
Sullivan, I'm sorry, yeah,
oh yes, I will show you some pictures I've shot on film. So I occasionally use film still for various reasons. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
awesome, great. So so you were, I wanted to focus on your Iranian stories. So you probably best known for your photographs of the Iran and Iraq war in 1980s, a period in which you were incredibly prolific and time
Yes.
when you photographs made the covers of international magazines. You stayed up there uh, for more than 8 years. So what exactly drawn you into Iran? Why you were interested on Iran?
Well, the first the first reason was that nobody could get in, um, and the magazines were all trying to get somebody in. And I was fascinated by a country that was so sophisticated that almost went backwards in many ways. I mean, it was corrupt under the Shah. I don't think there's any question about that. But to move from the Shah to move into this religious life was quite extraordinary. So it was quite a fascinating country to see and be involved in. I spent so many years, and I still go back there. Um, because I'm so intrigued to see, you have Persepolis, this is Persia that was so supportive of the arts and mathematics and built so many extraordinary things that all of a sudden everything's being destroyed and knocked back and it's all wrong. So it's just this strange juxtaposition of what was going on that absolutely fascinated me about what was happening. It had some history that recent history. Like, for instance, they had a very good prime minister that came in, but the Americans didn't like that, so they organized a coup and they put the Shah back in again. And then things deteriorated again. And then we had the next revolution with Khomeini coming back from France and coming in, where I think about 2 million people welcomed him back. But I don't think anybody realized what was going to happen when they got back. So they went from one difficult situation to another challenging situation. So it was quite fascinating to see history happening, being part of that whole historical thing happening in a very important part of the world. So I was always interested in it. one of my majors was history. So I'm fascinated about what happens in different countries. And here was the opportunity to be right in the middle of something. The Iran-Iraq War was the biggest war in the 20th century, longest war in the 20th century, sorry. So I think it went for 8 years. And nobody knows how many people died. So much was going on there, so much intrigue. And a lot of what you hear about Islam happening in the world today happened from that place, happened from Iran, happened from Tehran, or the holy city of Qum. Now, we were lucky also to be able to follow one of the young besieged down to the war front. Now, the besieged are the ones that run across the minefields, clear the minefields before the soldiers come in. So here's a young guy called Muhammad. He was walking under the Quran that his father is holding, and his mother behind is saying goodbye to him so he can go to the war front. He'd already been down to the war front several times. His friends had died and gone to paradise, but he hadn't, and he wanted to go back and try. So we followed him, and you can see here the besieged, not only young kids, but older people as well. You can tell they're not soldiers, they're all marching out of time. And they marched down to the war front, where we followed them down to the war front. And there we were in a camp where they had these people. And this is a commander. I don't know why he's leaning up against a mine, but these are the landmines that did the enormous damage to these people. This is right on the war front again. When we finished the story on Muhammad, the commander offered to shoot Muhammad because he was still alive, which is the most horrendous thing we can think of. We said no, we didn't want him killed. So what happened was these young poor people ran across minefields, cleared all the minefields before the soldiers came in, terrified the Iraqi soldiers seeing these people running towards them. But of course, when you run over minefields, you either lose your limbs or they're very badly damaged. And I managed to get into this rehabilitation center that used to be a general's house in the Shah's time, and photograph all the calipers. The awful thing is on the wall there, they're love poems, they're Shia love poems, as well as the face of Khomeini, the leader of the revolution. I worked for Life magazine a few times there and managed to get in there again one day into the rehabilitation center and photograph people strapping on their new limbs or their calipers. I also photographed this young shepherd boy who'd lost his leg, lost his arm, lost his face, lost his sight. And his father came to comfort him and offered to give his eyes to his son. But the face was so badly damaged that he couldn't they couldn't remove father's eyes and give them to his son. It's quite tragic. Mining is a very, very terrible thing. Also, you know, people die, you know, in wars. We don't see a lot of this. We see all the glory of war. War is not glory. It's horrible. It's noisy. It's shocking. So I was walking through the Beheshti Zara, the Martyrs Cemetery, one day in Tehran, and I saw a large group of people, and they called me over when they saw me and said, photograph what's happening here and show the world what's going on. And so I couldn't get through the crowd, so I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled to the front of the crowd, and there's this woman crying and weeping and wailing beside a grave. Her son had been killed down on the war front, and so she was crying and she was weeping, and I shot this picture of her, and as I shot this picture, she threw herself into the grave, and I took this picture of her very quickly before they grabbed her out of the grave. Now, I see a lot of young photographers, and here's a little bit of advice here. I see a lot of young people nowadays shooting pictures. They take a picture and they're looking on the back of the camera. Well, you miss the best pictures. You miss the things that are going on. So we don't look at the back of the camera till we're away from the situation. We keep shooting till we're there. I know my cameras work. I know what I'm looking for, so I'm not looking at the back of my camera. I mean, when I took these pictures, it wouldn't have done me any good because I was shooting film. But even nowadays, when I'm shooting digital, I only look at the back of the camera when I finish. So I managed to get that picture of her in the grave. The other thing that the Iranian government wanted us to see was justice. So they let us go to a murder trial. So we photographed the murder trial of a murderer, of an alleged murderer called Mustafa the Butcher. The local papers called him Mustafa the Butcher because he killed his partner in a drug deal and slit his throat from ear to ear. Now, the Mustafa was a pretty shocking man. He was a gangster already and a drug dealer. And they allowed the family into the court to watch. In fact, the father of the victim leapt up and screamed at Mustafa, he's the man that killed my son, in the middle of the trial. And then the judge found Mustafa guilty. Now, what happens in a trial there is there are two judges. One judge is a civil judge, and the other judge is an Islamic judge. So the civil judge says whether the person on trial has broken civil law, and the Islamic judge says he's broken civil law, Islamic law. So obviously Mustafa, by killing somebody and slitting the throat, had broken both laws. So after the trial, we went round to see the Islamic judge, and we said, what are you going to do with Mustafa? He said, and I quote here now, he said, Mustafa is a weed in the Garden of Eden, and he should be plucked out, executed, and killed. When would you like me to hang him? When would the light be best for your photographs? Would you like me to hang him in the morning, evening, or afternoon? Come back tomorrow and let us know. Now, again, as I said to you earlier, you're making decisions all of the time when you're doing this job. You're in positions where you have to make ethical decisions, moral judgments. And no way could we make this decision. Now, remember, at this time, I'm with a film crew from Australia. So we went back to our place where we were living, and we discussed all of this, and we refused to participate in any way, shape, or form. So we went back to speak to the judge. But what had happened was the victim's family had accepted money from Mustafa's family, so Mustafa lived. He didn't get hung. So we didn't have to make the decision about when he was killed. It's extraordinary, isn't it, to have to make these sort of decisions. Let me just move on a little bit, because I think we talked about ethical dilemmas before. So let me just talk about the other side that was going on, because one of the things I wanted to do was show what was going on in Iran at the time, because it's all very well to see all of this stuff about people being killed and all the rest of what was happening. But even though everywhere you look, the leaders of the revolution were looking down on you, it's the daily life that I was interested in as well. Now, one day I'm on a platform with the president of Iran, Rafsanjani, and there were huge crowds of people in front of us. And Rafsanjani is talking to the crowd, and in his hand he had a gun, and he is waving the gun at the crowd and screaming at the crowd, and the crowd were leaping to their feet and yelling back at him. And I said to my guide who was on the platform with me, hey, what is the president saying? What is he saying? The president is saying that all foreign correspondents tell lies. Death to all foreign correspondents. I'm the only one on the platform. It was death to me. I wasn't too happy on that day, I can tell you. But I wanted to photograph the everyday people everywhere. So I've been concentrating on doing that for a long time, photographing people just getting on with their lives. Even though there's been a revolution, even though there's a war, you still have to get on with your lives. You still have to, the bazaris still have to work. The bazaars still have to go. Prayer still goes on, life still goes on. I photographed the Zoroastrians praying and worshipping fire. I photographed there's a Jewish community in Tehran that was there during the all the upheaval. So I photographed that as well. Photographed weddings, all sorts of weddings. How everybody saw everybody in black, but they weren't seeing everything that was going on. So to be fair and to be just, have to show all sides of what's happening on in Iran. Otherwise, you're only doing a biased point of view. Can't help but being biased. We're all biased in one way or another, but trying to actually show a reasonable overall view of the country is very important. But the hardest thing for me to do was photograph women. It was very, very difficult to photograph women. In fact, I was working for an American magazine at the time, and we wanted to photograph women of Iran. And so I had to stand in a jewelry shop, and the owner of the jewelry shop let me take pictures through the window. So you got the reflection of the jewels, and the women outside. But the jewels were important because you'd buy gold, and that was your way of getting money out of the country. So there was a whole thing going on there about the jewels, the gold, and the women who I was not allowed to photograph. Now, after I took these pictures, I went outside and I was grabbed by two men who tried to drag me into a car. They were security people, and they said, "You've been photographing women," and they tried to take me away. But the journalist that I was with came out as well, saw him there, and we had this fight going on between the security people, myself, the journalist. Then a crowd started to appear, and they started making a lot of noise, and the security men decided this is not worth the trouble, so they drove off and left us. So I was extremely lucky not to get taken away in that situation. Again, as I say, it's very difficult to photograph the women. So here I am, it's from behind, but it's all about shapes and forms and patterns. But eventually, over the last few years, when I photographed the women, you can see how things have changed, how they've got, they now, a lot of the women are having cosmetic surgery, having their nose altered, their lips widened, various things done. So you can see in this how everything has changed from being covered up totally in black to getting involved more in society, and how much more open that Iran has become over the years. Now, one of the things that happened to me, it took me 5 years to get a picture of Khomeini. They would not let anybody near him for a very long time. And then one day I got a call at my hotel, "Be ready tomorrow morning. Somebody's coming to get your camera gear tonight, and be ready tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So somebody came to the hotel. I had to give them all my camera gear. They took it away. The next morning at 9 o'clock, they picked me up and they took me to the north of Tehran. And I waited at this security office, and then they gave me back all my camera gear. They went carefully through my body a number of times. And then I got into Ayatollah Khomeini's private mosque at his home, which is extraordinary. No one had seen him some time. They thought he was dead. Now, the thing about this is he appeared on the platform, as you can see in the right-hand side. He was there for a brief moment. Next to him, behind him, was his son, who everybody thought was going to take over. But down the bottom, if you look underneath, you can see a man with his back to you with a white turban on. That is President, what's his name? I can't think of it. That was the group of people that took over. That was Rafsanjani and Khamenei and the various other people that took over. So there you have this Khomeini. This was the last picture of him taken alive in a public area. He died not longer after this. And next to him, the son that should have taken over, but down below in the corner was the people that did take over after Khomeini died. So a really important picture that got used many, many times, including Time, who commissioned me to go to Iran at that time. In fact, they commissioned me to go to Iran twice. The first time I got there, I got kicked out the second day. So they spent all that money flying me in, and I just got kicked out. But I went back again and I managed to get this picture for them. Now, a lot of this is about being trusted and networking. You know, if I hadn't made all the right contacts, there's no way I would have been able to get into that place, even though it took me 5 years. In fact, my networking had stretched so far, but by this stage, that I got approached by a Russian spy who offered me money to spy for Russia about the people that I was mixing with, as you can see. But he offered me rubles. So I said to him, "Look, rubles are not worth very much. Sorry, I can't spy for you."
Yeah, Michael, some very historical images you're showing today, and the stories behind it. So, as you have been mentioning about gaining trust. So people, you gained the trust of the people. So how did you trust the people whom you were working with? Like as you say, the people took took away your cameras, and they just took you in an unknown place where you didn't know about, and then in number of cases you had to rely on the people in the ground. So what did it take for you to trust people?
Look, spending time with them, and that's the only way you can do it, is spending time with them. And you have to have a certain amount of trust, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to work in there. And if they allow you to get there, then you reasonably feel that you can trust. A lot of the time they want you to show what they want. They want to control the situation. But the whole point about that is trying to see everything else that's going on. I mean, I've been kicked out of Iran. I was kicked out once and I was forbidden to come back another time. But then eventually they let me come back, because I was always honest about what I did, even though they didn't always like it. And that's what I found with a lot of these situations, being honest about it, even though they don't always like it. So it led to me being able to do many other things. Yeah. I then came back to Australia, and I really needed a break from all of that stuff. I'd really had enough. So I came back to Australia, and I did a book about the fact that Australia is a multicultural country, and I photographed 70 people from 70 different nationalities who'd become Australians, with 70 different occupations in 70 different locations around Australia, to show some of the atmosphere of Australia and the environment of Australia,
Wow.
which took me 3 years to find these 70 different people from 70 different nationalities.
And
so
which year was it?
In 1986.
Right.
So this is a guy from Chile who was a piper. He'd fled from Chile because they were all of his friends were being locked up and tortured. This is a woman who's an Israeli archaeologist, and she works with the Aboriginal people in the outback of Australia. This man was a French chef, and he was working as a diver for Jacques Cousteau in West Australia. This woman was from Laos. She was Hmong, and she became a lawyer in Tasmania, Australia. This guy was a cowboy from New Zealand, and he was very happy for me to photograph him so he could show his children what he looked like. He wasn't very happy with the picture because he couldn't see what he looked like. And now finally I photographed a guy from Austria that had always wanted to be a cowboy. So he came to Australia, and he ended up being a camel expert in northern Australia. I was photographing him with the camels, and he leaned over, and the camel leaned over and kissed him. Just one of those moments in life. Camel's breath is terrible, let me tell you. And then
these are absolutely some amazing images. Like, you have been taking photographs in the war, and now you are back in your own country photographing the new immigrants, and
yes,
your photographs kind of give immense power to the people in the photos. So this is really amazing. So you have been doing it in 1986, but how do you, reflecting on your own work on the immigrant in Australia, how do you see the current immigrant situation in all over the world?
Look, I have an expression about the fact that I think that you have to solve where the issue begins, not where it ends. If you don't go to the beginning, you're never going to solve anything. You have to look at where things start. Why do we have these situations? Why is this? So it's cause and effect. So what is the cause? Why don't we deal with the cause and not the effect? And then things would be much easier. Now that sounds very easy to say, but look, we're all human beings. We're all equal, and we all have to try somehow or other to live with each other on the earth. And really, basically, most people are decent people. I've found in every situation, most people are decent. But you get extremists everywhere that cause more problems than the actual average person. Look, in many situations I've been in, the average person just wants to get on with their life, feed their children, have a roof, and have a reasonable life. But it's the extremists that cause all of the problems, that agitate for what's going on. I mean, it's kind of a long answer to your question, But these are the sort of things that you have to look at. We shouldn't have the amount of migrants that we should, and refugees that we should. We should have more of a fluid movement of people, definitely. But why aren't we looking at the causes in those countries of why people are leaving? Because what those countries lose are the educated people. So we lose the people they need, who are the administrators, the lawyers, the doctors, the people that can actually make the country regrow again, the ones you don't want to lose, because they're the ones that leave have the money to be able to do that. So they're the ones that you want to be able to keep. So we have to find ways of trying to get the people to stay and rebuild their own lands. My answer. Simplistic, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. So I see that you have been trying with color and black and white. So do you have any particular thoughts in your mind to pursue this particular project in two different formats?
Yes, I did. For instance, the one, I'll just go back to that so you can see the color. This book was sponsored by Kodak, and I shot it all on Kodachrome film. So we wanted it because we wanted to show the color of Australia as well as the people. So I wanted to shoot that one in color. So I'm actually, the color was part of the image. Now, this book that I did was about the Jesuits, who are Catholic priests that are highly trained, and highly intellectual, and before they even finish their training, they're into their 40s. They spend their whole life preparing for what they're doing, and they're in various areas in the world. And I wanted to do a book about what they were doing because the diversity of this group of people was extraordinary. And the only way to do this for me was in black and white, because I didn't want to be distracted by the color. I didn't want to photograph people in developing countries making it look beautiful with the color. I wanted to see the raw of it by having it in black and white and taking all of the color out. I think it was quite necessary for that. So if I talk about this book, it was, I spent 4 years doing this book, traveling around the world. I'd spent quite a number of years photographing the Islamic world. So I wanted to go back to my world and photograph that and show what was going on. So it was the anniversary of the Jesuits. They were 450 years old. So I have a lot of friends with the Jesuits. I've worked a lot with the Jesuits. I've done a lot with their refugee service in various areas. So I had the opportunity to live with them and work with them worldwide. So I happened to be in Burundi and Rwanda when the massacres happened. So on this particular occasion, this Jesuit, young man had become a Jesuit, and we were at his celebration. But it is in a center where a lot of people got chopped up and hacked during the fight between the Hutu and the Tutsi. So this was this is the first time that any celebratory event had happened in this building. And how I did this picture, for those young people that want to know, I had a small flash on there. I took it on a 15th of a second, and with just a little bit of flash, so I lit up the room, which wasn't very bright, but I didn't want to overlight it because the nuns in the foreground were in light colors and the man in the background was in black. So I wanted to be able to balance the light so I could pick up everything that was going on. But I wanted the movement in there to show the energy and the vitality of this new growth of what was going on, about the end of that terrible massacres that has happened and the beginning of this life again. Okay, so then I went to Soweto and I photographed the people working in Soweto in South Africa and moved down there to work on what was happening there. Then I went up to Guyana in South America and I worked with a missionary out in the jungle. This is a tributary to the Amazon. And I just worked there, and it's obviously pouring with rain. I'm standing on the front of a boat while the boat's going very quickly down the river, and I'm being poured with rain and all the rest of it. And then I photographed the Jesuits working up in the Guyana there, doing their daily work, just being human, sewing and working before they go out on their trails. Then back to Guyana, back to Africa, where I worked with a priest who was working with the street gangs. And this young boy had broken his arm, and the Jesuit, Michael, there is checking the temperature of the young man. And we took the young man to a hospital to help him get fixed. Now you can see if you watch what's going on there, this whole picture is full. What's happening is that from edge to edge, frame corner to corner, one boy on the left, he's looking into the car to see who's in the car, check that they're safe. Other guys checking in the background there to make sure nobody else is coming into their territory. The guy next to Michael's face there is checking on the young man to make sure he's right. But do you see how I filled the whole frame with something going on all of the time, and it all comes in together in one narrative of what's happening in that space there? Yeah, it's very important to try and tell that story within the image, with one frame to show what's going on. Just having Michael's left hand barely in there, holding that man's hand to get the sense of what's going on there. Yeah. And then in Indonesia, people living on a rubbish dump. There was a Jesuit living in that house just over the top of the rubbish. And I stayed in that place. And I got so badly bitten by fleas from staying there that it took me weeks and weeks to get them out of my blood system. So I'm photographing the people working there because the Jesuits were working with these people, working with the street people, working with the gangs, working with people living on rubbish dumps, and working with people with street theatre in Central America, where they can't show their faces because they were having a street theatre that was really anti-government, but was pretending not to be anti-government. So it would be a story, but the people that came to see it in the villages would know it would be a anti-government. But I didn't want to show the man's face, because if they saw it in a book or something, they would have arrested and tortured him. So I shot it in the middle of the day, where the light was only falling on his body, not on his face, so I could hide his face from what was going on. Yep. Okay. And then I went back to Asia to live and work, and I started doing stories all over Asia, like, for instance, pollution in the Philippines. Here, some villages are in Pakistan, and they were being attacked by fundamentalists, and so at night they had very little in the way of arms or anything, but they'd sit around the fire guarding their village with sticks and axes. And I took this picture while they're having a cup of tea. It's on a very slow shutter speed, so people that know, you can see the movement in the fire. And I'm lying on the ground there, just trying to keep my camera steady. And I had a tiny little light, just a little light, what they call a lau, and it's only about the size of my hand. And I just put it there and just twisted it up. And if you look in the background, in the man's eye, you'll see a white light. And that's the only way I could get a tiny little bit of light so he didn't disappear, because there's no lights, there's no street lighting, there's nothing. They're only lit by the fire. So I just didn't want to overlight it. You don't overlight. It's always important to not overlight. Okay. And then I did the upheaval, the political upheaval in the Thailand, between the Reds and the Yellows that was going on there at the time. And then I went and did a story on Timor, as Timor became an independent country. And I shot the thing on a Holga. I wanted to shoot it on a Holga with film because I wanted to show the simplicity of this country, very, very poor country. So I didn't want to have big cameras and big things. So just show the gentleness of it all. In fact, I've jumped from that to another story that I did. I think the things have got mixed up, but never mind. I did this story on people living in a charcoal dump in Indonesia. In Manila. So it was pretty tough. And this woman stopped for a break to have a cigarette, and you could see that they're just covered in charcoal everywhere. And then I did the story on a chief in Papua New Guinea who was singing his language to death. Now, this poor blind chief was the last of his tribe, and his language, when he died, his language died. So he's singing his language to death.
And what was the language?
I don't know. It was I can't remember there are hundreds of languages in Indonesia, but they're dying out in that land. So I wanted to photograph it as the last man to be able to say that. Yeah. Yeah. Now, but here we have, sorry, please go back. Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in a different note, like you have been mentioning about Holga. So a lot of our viewers might not be familiar with this kind of camera. So I just wanted to tell you that to the viewers that the Volga is a very vintage type of camera, which is operated in a very manual way. And it's very exciting to see that the photographers, internationally acclaimed photographers like you, who have been doing a lot of stories around the world, experimenting with different types of cameras. So, what inspires you to experiment with these kind of old vintage cameras?
I wanted to, because Timor is a very poor, unsophisticated place, and it was becoming a new nation and struggling. I didn't want to go up there and do these kind of sophisticated images. I just wanted to shoot with something simple and let the camera go the way it does, because with the Holga, it doesn't always wind properly, so you get a bit of fogging, get a bit of edging, sometimes you get a bit of double exposure. So it was a very simple, and I wanted to keep the whole thing simple. I also wanted to keep it simple in the way that when the people were there, they weren't being confronted with this big camera, but just this simple little plastic thing that they could be didn't feel as if it was out of their world. It wasn't too kind of big and sophisticated. Yeah. And then I then at the same time, I did a series on the Sydney Olympic Games, the preparation, all of the stuff. And what I was commissioned to photograph the Olympic Games. Now, usually it was Kodak that commissioned me, and usually they get a sports photographer to photograph it. But I wanted to do something different. So I photographed the people around the Olympic Games who were involved in it in various ways. So I got a roll of paper and I would put it up all over the place. Now, for instance, this is on a boat in front of the Opera House in Sydney. This is in a woman's house who was she helped people with physical injuries, or she was a physiotherapist. And so I wanted to photograph her who worked with the athletes. This is a transvestite who was in charge of the Gay Olympics. And the Gay Olympics, he ran a particular event that he run. You would get a handbag full of sand and you'd throw it down the beach. So he was involved in the Olympics in that way. This is an administrator, an Aboriginal administrator who was once in the show Hair, and he asked me if he could be photographed in the nude, which I said he was perfectly welcome to appear that way. Though it did disconcert my assistant, who didn't know this, because my assistant was setting up the backdrop and the props and everything, and he was down on his knees working. And then he looked up, and standing in front of him was this totally naked Aboriginal man. So he got a bit of a fright. And then I photographed some people who trained the dancers and performers at the Sydney Olympics. And then she asked if she could be photographed on her own. Now, all this is shot on a Hasselblad. So it's going from one extreme to the other using a Hasselblad, which is very sharp, etc., as to using the Holga. Now, just to go back to the Holga, I think that other picture jumped out of sequence. I wandered through Timor shooting with this little camera, and I found things like this that could have been any century. You know, these people going to market with a pig on a bamboo cane just strung up, and wearing these old clothes. So it was just extraordinary, and that's why. And so we put a bit of sepia tone in it as well to give it that older, non-time feeling about it. And then they had United Nations soldiers still there, so we wanted to make sure we had a United Nations soldier in the book as well. Oops, I wanted to do that one because I then photographed a wedding, and we were driving through a village and we saw these people, this wedding party. Now, the reason the bridal clothes don't fit and the groom's clothes don't fit is everybody gets married wears those clothes. It's the only bridal outfit in the city, in the village, I'm sorry. So the gown was too long for the girl and the suit was too big for the man. So what I did was we got out of the car and I did the whole wedding album for these people. I did close-ups, I did wide pictures, I photographed the family, I photographed everything I could. And then when I got back to Australia, we printed all the pictures and we sent them back to the people in the village. So they're the only people that have a wedding album in that village. Now, which leads me to something else. I often try to send pictures back to people because I think that photography is a two-way thing, and I think it's important to give back as well as to taking from people. So the fact that I gave back these photographs of these people was something that they would treasure for a very long time, and then that we become bonded with this thing.
Michael, I wanted to share that sometimes I feel that everybody knows that the language of photography is so universal, and maybe you have taken this picture like at least 20 years ago, or means at least a decade ago, but still these photographs connect me so intensely, because it seems like it could be a photographs from a village from Bangladesh, because this reminds the photographs I've seen of my parents, my mom and dad, who got married in a remote village in Bangladesh. So I think the faces and the general views of the people all around the world has a kind of harmony, has a kind of a commonality among them. What do you think about it?
Look, I totally agree, and we're about to go into another project if we can, and it will show you exactly illustrate your point about how we're all connected in one way or another. But let me just show you quickly show you this book that I did that came out of a project I was doing. I went to a village in Australia to photograph a village life, and ended up, it was so quirky and strange that we put together of all of these pictures. Like, this is a builder. Look at his feet. They're totally white, but the rest of him is brown. And he had this all over his house. Very strange, very quirky thing. It's the first thing I saw when I entered this village. And then I went into one of the houses. Every room was like this. Every room was full of dolls. Really strange stuff. And then I got a phone call one day from the star footballer in the town. He said, "You haven't photographed my wife. She's the most beautiful woman in town. Here's a phone number." So he gave me her phone number, and I rang the woman, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to the beauty salon. Why don't you come down there?" And then this woman came out naked except for a G-string, and then stood there like this. And I took this picture of her getting a suntan with her colleague there, absolutely embarrassed and shamed by the whole thing. But it's about trust. It's about people trusting you. And they trusted me enough to do this picture. And incidentally, the footballer, I bumped into the footballer one day, and he said, "Didn't I tell you my wife was the most beautiful woman in town?" And that's just the characters walking along the streets as I photographed them in this town. And the people that were, this is the snake collector. If you had a snake in your house, he'd come and get it out of your house. Or the lots of celebrations like Anzac Day, which is a celebration of the people who went and fought in the Second World War. Or I went to a bachelor and spinster ball where everybody's enjoying themselves, the young people. Or I went to a hen's day. The only man on a hen's day was quite an experience. They went from pub to pub to pub right across the outback of Australia. So by this time, they're well and truly very, very happy.
Yeah, we have a very interesting question from one of our viewers, Mr. Rizwan Rizvi. He asked, "Your pictures are so natural. How did you naturalize yourself with such diverse characters while photography?"
It's embedding myself with the people, staying with them. I spent between 8 and 9 months at this village photographing these people and getting used to me and me getting used to them, until after a while they're just used to me being around. And often I'll come to something with no camera and just be there and talk to people and just respect the people. Respect is what everybody wants. So if you respect people, they'll respect you. So I'm just allowing people to be themselves and be around them. And then when something happens, I'm taking a picture and they're almost not aware of me being there and doing it. So it's just really embedding yourself with the people. And then I photographed, obviously, a death as well as the birth. You know, people allowed me, I get many births, and people allow me to get this close. But in this particular picture, they asked me not to show their faces. So that's, again, about the respect. They allow me to be there, but don't show our faces. So I'm not showing their faces. So, but it didn't matter. The image is there where it is. And I always cut off what I don't need. It doesn't matter whether you cut off heads, legs, arms, whatever. You just only keep in the picture what is need. So obviously it's a man, it's a man's arm. The rest of it's pretty obvious about what's going on. You know, and they allowed me to come and photograph this moment of the family of saying goodbye before they put the lid on the coffin. So it's quite a very personal moment. It's about being trusted, all right? About working up the trust. Now, here's what you were talking about before. I've just spent the last few years traveling the world photographing village life. What's happening is around the world that because of globalization and global warming, everything is changing and villages are changing. A lot of people are leaving villages because they can't get work and they're going to the city. Villages are either trying to rebuild themselves or change or find ways of surviving because now big farms are owned by multinational companies, and it's making it very difficult. For instance, these people here were villagers in India and they were digging up coal because what had happened was that they'd been driven off their land by corrupt officials in India. So the only way they could come back to their land was to work there as coal miners. Here's coal miners in China. The mining there is pretty terrible, and these guys have very few safety releases. You can see they're breathing in the coal dust. It's embedded in the man's lips. It's pretty shocking. I photographed farmers who were wee people in China who lived in the mountains. We managed to find some that were up there. Because I was worried about what was said on the wall, I went to the hotel, got a sheet and put it over the wall and got the other farmers to hold the sheet while I took the picture. This is inside a inside a volcano in Indonesia. The villagers make a living by getting sulfur outside the inside of the volcano, but they die quite young because the sulfur rots their bones and their teeth, and it kills them. In fact, I couldn't see very much after I left the place, and I had a burning throat. It was terrible, and I'd only been there for half a day. This is in Bangladesh, road workers working on the highways there. This is a farmer, just to give an opposite view, a farmer who had a very modern machinery, but the village shares the machinery because it's so expensive now to survive for the farmers, so you share the modern machinery. In France, villages rebuilding old buildings. In Portugal, laying out plastic to be able to save the plants from frost. And here's in Bangladesh again. This is a farmer in Bangladesh. Now, in Bangladesh, the waters were rising, there was flooding, and this poor farmer's land was gone. In fact, the villagers had all moved on from that area because it had become a lake which was once a river. And now he's a boatman and he can't go back onto his land and grow his stuff on his land. Yeah. It's in Israel. And this is an Israeli on a kibbutz fixing a piping on land that they fertilized. And again, on another kibbutz, growing carrots after they fertilized the land on a kibbutz. This is in Siberia, and I was with the nets up in Siberia, and they took us out fishing. And so I'm on a boat while they're trying to pull in the nets and gather in the fishing that were up there. And this is down in the Philippines, gold mine. These young men would go down into the tunnels and they put chemicals down there to find the gold, and they'd come out after being there all day and they'd be covered in this clay, and also the chemicals were very bad for them. Down in South America, photographing gauchos. At the end of the day, he's going home with his dogs after working with the cattle. Fishermen, again, living on a lake in Cambodia, and they're banging the nets to get the fish out of the net, next to their houses, the places that they live on the lakes. This is a woman who's working on the road. She's a road construction worker in Vietnam. These are workers that come from South Asia, and they're in a hostel in Singapore, and they live in very crowded conditions on some situations. It's pretty tough places where they are in Singapore. But because they can't earn enough money in their own countries, they'll come to these places. This is in Iran, and this guy is working at a hessian factory. This is England, and the guy is looking after manure. He's standing on manure. They're gathering up all the cow and horse manure in the paddocks, and they're using it. So he didn't tell me what it was until I'd been standing up to my knees in it, taking pictures. And then he said, "You better have a shower after you get off this place." I did some stories on child workers in Myanmar, and these kids are loading up cement for boats going along the Irrawaddy. This is a guy working in a sago factory in Sarawak. So it's all village life. It's really rural life that's going on today. But what connects everybody together is they're all struggling together to keep their villages and communities going. Because once you leave the village, you lose your community, you lose your contacts, and you lose the way of life. This is out in the Pacific Islands near New Guinea, and we got caught up in a storm, and this is the boatman driving us through the storm. Yeah, and I think I showed that picture again, so don't ask me how it came up. It's the coal miners. Maybe I liked it so much I showed it to you twice. This is a farmer in Australia. Now, the thing about this picture is I was waiting we were going somewhere. So while I'm standing there waiting, the sun came up, and the farmer was playing with his dogs, and they're running around in the dust. So while I'm waiting there, I shot this picture, and it was far better than the picture of where I wanted to go and take the other pictures. So the journey often is better than the actual event that's going to happen. So you've always got to be prepared and ready for when you're going to photograph. So I just want to show, because we're in Vietnam, I saw these guys building. But what is interesting me, if you look, it's all within boxes, and it's all kind of, it's about that content coming together at one moment where everybody's looking in one space. There's a hand on one side, faces, hands, bodies, feet, but they're all coming into the shape and form of the picture to making it work. Yeah. Any other moment, it's all a mess, but at that particular moment, it comes together in one form. Yep. Yeah. How are we going there, Andrew?
Absolutely awesome. So I wanted to ask you, like, you have been doing, you have been working on this particular village project for over 12 years now. So as you say, the village life is changing because of globalization, global warming, and agricultural changes. You also mentioned that for the first time in the history, more people are living in the cities than the villages. So I wanted to ask you, like, most of the time as documentary photographers always raise up the voices of the survivors or the vulnerables. So have you ever felt the importance of focusing on your camera on the process of corporatization, or like, you know, documenting the people like landlords or the middleman who are causing this kind of situation to the workers or to the villagers?
No, I've never focused on that. On this particular project, it's been a focus on village life. I'm not focused on, yes, it's the villagers, but it's the village life that's going on. I mean, it's not the major corporations, though. If you go back to the German picture I showed you, they work together as a corporation within the village, so they could share amongst themselves. So that happens, but no, I haven't done the landlords. But in a sense, I'm doing whatever's there. I'm not saying, are you the landlord or are you the peasant? Are you the rich one or are you the poor or whatever? It's not like that. It's, if I was in, I photographed some quite wealthy people in England. I can't show every picture, obviously. So I am trying to show everything within. I'm not focusing on one aspect of it, but I'm trying to show many aspects. What I'm trying to show you today is a quick reflection of the whole thing, because the project, after 12 years, as you could imagine, is very big. So as I go along a little bit more, you'll see other aspects of it. But what I'm trying to show is all of the different sides of what creates the problems that we want to leave the village. Why would we stay in the village? How do we stay in the village? That village I showed you in color in Australia became successful because they turned it into a village where it's a retirement village. Now people from the countryside can go and live there because they've set it up as a retirement place. There's more hospitals, there's more medical staff, the footpaths are made in such a way you can take wheelchairs, or if you can't walk properly, you can walk on those. The prices of homes are quite reasonable. It's set up in such a way that they can live there. So it's a matter of some villages can survive by changing what they're doing. Others have to change because globalization says you've got to go elsewhere to make money to survive. But there's the opposite. When I worked in China on this a number of times, there were people who left their villages, went to the economic zones, learned new skills, came back to their villages and started new jobs, started new industries, started new factories, started new ways of working. And that was really important, to bring something back to their community so that their community could stay together as one. The tragedy is, as I showed you the photograph of the man earlier who was blind and he's a chief and his language is going, is you lose customs, cultures, languages, you lose societies, and all of that is disappearing. And somehow I want to show this major change that's happened. And it's happened in a short time. It's just, it's happened since about the middle of the 20th century. It started to just all change. And now I see empty villages. I went to Chinese villages where there'd only be some very old people living there. So it's trying to just get an overall view of how this has all changed, not focusing on one particular aspect of it or another. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We got a question from Ania Aker. Michael, I wonder if any of these incredible shots haunt you. Do you dream of them? How do you cope with some of the disturbing aspects of their context?
I've had some terrible moments, but now I can put it away from me. When I first started doing all of this, I saw a lot of terrible things and I carried it, and I had to stop doing it for a little while because I just couldn't cope with it. But after a while, I learned to deal with it and learned to just close off the pictures from what I was doing and not engage with the people, but not engage with the terribleness of it. Because if I couldn't engage with the people and do it, then I couldn't go back to those places. So I would come home and scream and yell about it, but I wouldn't let myself get overtaken by it. I remember seeing some terrible things once and going to, after I left, I went to Dubai to have a rest. We flew into Dubai and it was New Year's Eve. And I was there with a couple of colleagues and we were quite overwhelmed by what we'd seen. So we drank a lot of champagne, and the following morning I woke up wearing an Ethiopian airline pilot captain's hat. And to this day, I've no idea how that hat got into my bed. So, but it was our way of kind of trying to step outside of what's going on. But the decision about to go to awful places and awful things has to be made before you go. You have to know you're going to do this, and so you prepare yourself for it, or you can't go. And it's about preparation, really. Everything is about preparation and about being aware of what's going to happen.
Sure, everything is about preparation. So I think we are close to our time. So
okay.
But I really want you to finish the
All
village.
right.
Yeah.
I'll just flick
Please.
through a couple more so you get a sense of
Yeah, sure, of
what's
course.
going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Bedouin being spied on by the Israeli military because they wanted his land for military purposes. People working in Pakistan in a brick factory. Now, this is what I was getting to. I went into a jail, a country jail, and in every cell I went to, I'm hearing this singing, Elvis Presley impersonation everywhere. So I went out into the yard and I saw this prison guard doing karaoke and just singing away. But every speaker in every cell was turned on, so the prisoners had to listen to this guard singing to them. And not only that, he asked them for a nickel so he could feed the karaoke machine. So they're paying for their own punishment. Okay, pollution in Wuhan, as we know about Wuhan now, where the virus came from. So the pollution was pretty bad there. That was a little while ago that I photographed the pollution there. A drought in Pakistan. I was riding on a sledge across the Siberia, which was just extraordinary. In a train in Russia, I'm photographing these people sitting in front of me, and all of a sudden, this head bobbed down from above. I didn't even know the girl was there, and the head came down. Click! I took the picture before anything had happened. But if you look on the T-shirt, can you read the T-shirt there? It says,
Yep.
"Never look back."
Never look back. Yeah.
Isn't that extraordinary? I mean, it's just one of those things where everything comes together in your photograph.
And I also like the way the lady and the gentleman looking away, and it seems like they're looking to the girl, but they're not, I guess.
Yes, they didn't know it all happened so quickly. Bang. And Scotland, where it's very cold and icy. I was in Ireland where these people were dancing, so on a slow shutter speed, just get the sense of doing the ballroom dancing. Collecting water in Chile because they had no water in the area they were in, clean water. Just a family portrait in Argentina in a small village of the family there. It's in a Irrawaddy of young men bathing and washing themselves after working. A village bathhouse in China. I managed to get myself in there. And I stepped inside and I quickly took some pictures and I went. I felt that was enough. But I did manage to get in and get the pictures, yeah. When I was in Crete, this woman was resting with her feet in a bucket after a busy day, having a cigarette. Playing chess, Chinese checkers. But the thing that makes the picture is you see the shadow in the middle of the picture of the man silhouetted. I took the pictures before he was there. When he came, all of a sudden the picture all worked. It all linked together. Didn't work without him there. So it's just a matter of waiting till something happened like that to link all the picture there, fill all the corners, all the edges, and link everything together. Woman having a cup of tea in Scotland. Very not terribly good IT system in Sarawak. So this man's out at night trying to make connections. A ceremony in Papua New Guinea for a young man walking through the smoke. I guess, for want of a better word, they're hippies in Argentina, and they're all very, very happy people. So whatever they were doing, smoking, drinking, eating, consuming, I've no idea, but they were certainly very happy people. This is a transvestite in Pakistan. I photographed a whole series of them, and they were tremendously friendly and very helpful. And they'd just been given the rights to be a third sex in Pakistan. Sex workers who come from villages in the Philippines, but they are earning living by working as sex workers. So they're there with a customer. As I explained to you before we went on air, I have much more graphic images, but I told the man I would not show them online. I can print them in my book, but I'm not allowed to show them in any form online. And again, that's about being trusted. I will probably never see that man again, but I don't want to break the trust of him allowing me to photograph what went on. They're quite graphic images, but there was it's about trust and agreeing to help people. Okay, and it's the wee people on the streets drinking alcohol. Pretty tough stuff for them to survive. Oh, we're back there again. I was photographing these women at a ceremony, and then as I'm taking the pictures, these hands groped around the edge and grabbed that woman's breasts when I least expected it. So it was just a very funny moment at a very serious situation. Here's a woman, a Hmong woman, who's trying to sell her things, but you can see what's happening to her village in rural areas, McDonald's moving in, so you can actually see the changes that are going on there. So her costume and then McDonald's, right? Children, I'm very careful about children. I always try to do it in a positive way for them. I went to photograph this guy in Laos in a village who was on smoking opium, and he lit up his first pipe, and I'm very, very close for a very wide angle lens. And by the time he'd lit up his sixth pipe, I was very happy. In fact, it was the happiest job I've ever done. Every time I breathed in, I felt more happy. Children in India, they just kind of smoke everywhere in the morning air while they're lighting a fire sitting around it. This is sea pirates, and they're learning a language, the little boy trying to understand a world that's so different to him. In Greece, morning cleanup. Woman collecting snakes in Australia. We're good into snakes here. A hunt in Ireland, the dog inquisitive. This is, I'm not sure if you remember in Japan, they had a nuclear disaster and a terrible tornado. And so I'm photographing a town that was totally destroyed by the disaster. Nuclear disaster, sorry. Yep, celebration in India. Old people celebrating in Hong Kong because their land was taken away from them by the Chinese government. Ceremony, religious ceremony in Spain. And obviously a Catholic ceremony in Myanmar. And refugees in Nepal, they're queued up to get water, waiting for water to be delivered. And a woman in Israel, Palestine, whose home was bombed. The Israelis bombed her home, so she's now living in a cave. This is a guy who's a landmine victim in Cambodia. This man is chained up because he's got mental health issues, and he was attacking himself and attacking others. So the only way his family could look after him was chain him up in a room. So he's locked up there. This man was tortured by the government, and he walks the streets screaming at people as he walks past. This man has HIV/AIDS in Myanmar, on the Myanmar-Iranian border. This young man has polio, and polio in Cambodia was pretty big at the time. And I didn't want to emphasize everything, so I shot it half in shade, half in light. But by looking at the shadows, etc., you can see that he's obviously got polio. Man with malaria in northern Ethiopia at a clinic. His friend was helping him and carrying him. The death of a wee man and the woman weeping over her relative. And a baby being born in East Timor to a villager. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for some amazing photographs. And you have organized the photographs in such a way. I don't know, each of the photographs have their own stories behind, and I'm sure that those photographs tell different photo stories. And this is amazing to see. You have been working all over the world in different types of assignments, but your photographs not only tell the stories of the war or the conflict, but also it shows the hope. It shows the possibilities. It shows the ray of light, and not only the death, but also the newborn. Not only the workers, but also the people who are empowered, as well as I'm really very much lucky to have you today, and I'm sure that all the viewers are so excited to see your photos, and of course learn the behind the picture stories. I'm sure that the my viewers have been so much familiar with your work before, but I'm really feeling very privileged to present you towards my viewers, and so that they learn the behind the picture stories of your legendary photographs. I really appreciate you to be here in the third episode of Photos and Stories, and I hope to have you again in future. So what's your next assignment? So what's your next endeavor? And at the same time, I want to ask you a very common question, which I always receive from the aspiring photographers. Like, what would be the one great suggestions you would give the new photographers who are coming to the industry?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is never give up and never give in. And secondly, find a good mentor. And one of the big things when I joined Black Star Agency was not because of the quality of the work that I could do or not do. It was because I went out looking for my own ideas. As I showed you in the beginning, I went looking for my own stories. I went to a place looking for things. So I would suggest to young photographers, use your initiative, find the stories, because good pictures and good stories are always wanted and can always be sold. And thank you very much for letting me be part of this. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak this morning, or this evening in your time. I apologize. I hope I didn't talk for too long. I appreciate you coming, and thank you very much for asking me.
This has been a great honor for us, because you consider to be on air and maintaining the three different time zones. I'm in Washington D.C. Most of our viewers are from South Asia, and then you are in Australia. So, but still you managed it so perfectly, and I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best, of course. And we are looking forward to see more powerful work from you in near future.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Andrew. Enjoy the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice one. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, viewers, it is my constant effort to present legendary and successful photographers from all around the world and stories behind their legendary photographs. I will appear in the next episode with a new guest, with another spectacular photographer, and with some amazing stories. Until then, stay tuned.